People often ask me how it's possible to move to China, to live in China. I know a lot of people see China as safe, stable, it's cheap to live. It's obviously a warm, welcoming, friendly place. It's full of helpful people. So wherever you are, welcome to another of my takes on China and how I live here. The question I'm answering today is a regular one in many different forms. This one came from NoMoreT00, who asked me if I could answer the question in a video. It's by no means the first time I've been asked to make a video on how easy or hard it is to move to China. So some of the questions: how difficult is it to become a citizen? Is it hard to find work for those over 50? Can you still collect a pension from your home country or country of origin? Is the food safety a problem? Is it hard to own a 4-bedroom home? Where can you live with no earthquakes or flooding? What are some of the latest start-up cities? So let me clear up something for many people who think I'm better connected than I am. I can't help you with visas. I can't help with government connections. I have virtually none. I can't help you find a job here, as I'm not even very well connected myself these days. But I can certainly answer questions that are specific to China. And this question had a few. Let's look at them one by one. Food safety, it's easy. If you eat in decent places, you get decent food. If the place is outdoors and looks dirty, it's quite possible it is dirty. But if it's packed with people, then there's a very good chance it's great food at great prices. And if you follow the locals, you're likely to get a great meal. One thing I've noticed here is that there are almost no allergies. Some Chinese people don't handle milk, lactose intolerance. Some turn red just on a sniff of alcohol, but it's rare to find anyone who can't handle peanuts. Almost all meals are cooked in peanut oil. And even people who swear blind they're allergic to peanuts eat them and live to tell the tale here in China. The problem with allergies seems to be very much Western-based and more likely concerned with what's been added rather than what's contained in fresh, mostly organic food. So another thing worth noting is how hard it is to import food into China. It must pass a series of tests and not contain anything that's detrimental to health. Veterinary residue, hard to say. It's a huge problem here. Meat can't have any left in there. Lead is a problem, and the very reason why Australian lobsters aren't allowed into China yet is because they can't be certified as lead-free. Until they are, they're staying out of China. So, okay, that's the food thing done. Now, some people might want to become a citizen in China. I'm not sure why, but let's say we do want to be a citizen here. The process is to live here on a resident visa for 5 years, then apply for permanent residency, and after 5 years on that, you can apply for citizenship. So it takes 10 years. An application for these residencies takes 6 months, but if your visa expires during the application process, you needn't worry. They will extend you until the decision is made. Now, it's safe to say you can only live in China if you have a reason to do so. I'm married, I worked here for 13 years, and I have a reason to stay. Without a reason, my wife, that's the reason. I would only be allowed if I had a residency and applied for permanent residency during that period when I was working. So how do you get here on a resident permit? You need to have a job. Anyone can apply for a tourist visa. It's for visitors. It doesn't count as residential. Most people can apply for business visas, but you need a letter of invitation from the people you plan to do business with. Getting a job might be something like a teacher or a biophysicist or anything in between, and you get a working visa with a residential permit. You need qualifications. Even teachers need a bachelor degree, a TEFL, that's to Teach English as a Foreign Language certificate. You also need 2 years experience, and you need a clean police record from your home country. Once you have all that, you're issued with a 30-day visa called a Z visa, which your company will then help you convert into a resident permit and working visa after you arrive. So that's done outside the country. After 5 years of that, you can apply for permanent residence. There are fast tracks, but you need to be very highly qualified and in a career that China wants. This will most likely be science or technology based, but you can get PR in your first year if China really wants you here. Some people complain that they worked 10 years in China and then they were kicked out. Well, it's possible they were working on business visas. This used to be very common. I personally arrived in China in 2004 on a business visa. It was valid for a year and good for 90-day stays. I had to cross the border into Macau or Hong Kong every 3 months to restart the period. And each year I went to Hong Kong to renew the visa. And that's no longer legal. But some people still live here on this kind of visa. You can't buy property. Technically, you can't even lease property without a resident permit. But many people do. So it's a bit of a grey area. And nowadays, you can't open a bank account. Although when I came here, you could. So some people have them. I know this because I did it. Now, if they're living here legitimately and didn't want to leave China, then they weren't kicked out. They decided not to apply for permanent residency, which we'll come to in a minute. In 2013, China announced a change in the rules which would be enforced in 2016. People like me who were teaching must be qualified. You must have proper visas, you must have a clean police record, and at that time, a lot of people who are now actively anti-China on social media were forced to leave. Those of us who are qualified went through the process of getting proper visas. I've had a legitimate visa to live in China since 2013 when my boss and I decided to go through the process together. It's a little more cumbersome, but not at all difficult. We all got proper visas to live and work here in China. Then in 2018, I turned 60, and that was the end of my visa limit. It's retirement time. And there are some people who can work longer, those specially qualified people, and I was actually one of them. All I needed to do was stay with my current employer, and I could work up to 65. But I wasn't happy with my employer. So I retired, and I started to collect my British police pension. The pension is very easy to get into China, but there are some hurdles to get through. One is that foreign residents are not allowed to get paid in RMB. So you need your pension either paid into a bank account outside of China where you can access it through an ATM, or if it's paid into China, it needs to be in your own currency, not RMB. If your pension agency converts it to RMB, you'll lose a little on the exchange. The bank will see that RMB has been paid to a foreigner held account and converted to US dollars. Once again, you lose something on the exchange. And then when you go to the bank to collect it, they convert it to RMB for you and you lose a little more. You're also limited to 50,000 US dollars per annum, but for me that's not a problem. There is a way around this, and to do that, I registered my wife with the bank and she can also get 50,000 US dollars. So that should be enough for most people to live very, very well on. If you're paid into your home country's bank account, you can withdraw 500 US dollars a day, but again, this will be limited to $50,000 a year. I didn't get forced out of China because since 2009 I've been married to a Chinese lady. When I stopped working, we applied for and were granted a 2-year residential marriage visa. All I needed to do was to prove I could support myself and I have somewhere to live. At the time, my wife owned one apartment and I owned another, so it was no problem. Now, why didn't I get permanent residency? That's an obvious question. And I'm now in the process of doing that. And to apply, we need a clean police record, no problem for me, a record of having lived legitimately in China for 5 years or more, no problem for me. We need to have 200,000 RMB in the bank for a period of 6 months locked away, again, no problem. And we need to have somewhere to live which we either own or had a long-term lease on. Now, the only reason I haven't applied before is because my wife's hukou is in another city. That's her householder registration. So we need to apply there, not here in Zhongshan, where we both actually live. Anyone with a residential permit can own property in China. If you are a resident and you leave China and sell the property, you can legitimately take the money out of the country with you. Or if you have savings or investments, you need to prove you earned the money legitimately and you can transfer it out. If you don't want to go through the hassle, you'll be limited to transferring 50,000 RMB a year or 500 US dollars a day at an ATM outside of China. So let me answer some of the other questions. Where can you live where there are no earthquakes? Well, that's actually most of China. There have been some pretty bad earthquakes in China. There are many out in the west, but this isn't a real problem for, say, 90% of China who are on the east coast. I've been here 20 years, I've never experienced one, and I think when they do happen, they're generally not serious. 1976 and 2008 were exceptions. Flooding. Central China does experience flooding. Southern China gets lots of rain, but rarely floods to the point of causing damage. We get roads here that are underwater, but again, in 20 years, I've never personally been affected by a flood. Most major cities are well catered for and with the amount of rain, but there are sometimes disasters. And the same in every country. When the rain is really bad, I don't think China is any worse than Australia, the UK, or the USA. And one thing they do very often is they build back in a better way to avoid repetitions, something New Orleans, for example, could surely benefit from. What is the problem, for example, with the great floods of Lismore in Australia a few years ago? 100% of the population was affected, but the population is only 25,000 for that city and the surrounding area. In China, 10% of the population might be affected, but the city might have 8 to 10 million. So the flooding is no worse, but the effect of it might be. Now, as for the best place to live, I really can't answer that one. If you don't like hot and humid weather, then don't come to Guangdong. If you don't like freezing winters, then don't go to Beijing, or especially don't go to Dongbei in northeast China. If you don't like spicy food, don't go to Hunan or Sichuan, and definitely don't go to Chongqing. But if you like adventure and love trying new things and can tolerate some discomfort, there isn't a place in China that you won't enjoy. I can only suggest you try it and see. But if you plan to retire and stay for your life, it isn't like Thailand where you go there, settle down, get a retirement visa. You need that connection to China either through long-term working here or through perhaps a marriage. Also, please note, the marriage must be recognized in your own country and in China. So a legal marriage. In other words, if you're a man and you marry your Chinese boyfriend quite legitimately in a country that allows this, you won't be allowed to settle in China on a marriage visa. But you can still do so on a legitimate working visa and a permanent residency if you fill all the criteria. So you can get 5 years and be a resident. China doesn't discriminate you for that. It does not allow you to be married. That's the only thing. If you have any further questions about this, leave them in the comments. I read them all, and I will try to answer them all. My life in China is here because I worked here for so long. I'm married here. I have property here. Other people have different circumstances. Everybody is different. But the fact is, if you want to live in China, you need to have a connection to China. How you get that connection is really up to you. You can work here, you can marry here, you can find some other way that I don't know about, but that's basically it for me. If you have any questions, please feel free to leave them. I will get back to you. Thanks very much, and I'll see you next time. Bye for now.